To refresh, constructive developmental theory is about how we make sense of ourselves and our relationships. We can actively take steps in organizations to help develop talent and expand their understanding of organizational life. All of this can be understood through a maturity process where we move from being subject to our worldviews and relationships to being able to hold these apart from ourselves for reflection and change. So much of this can be observed in the language we use. An example of this is the coworker who says, "I am anxious," instead of, "I have anxiety." So why does it matter when it comes to leadership, group dynamics, and organizational change? And what can we do to move ourselves forward developmentally in each of these contexts? Let's start by creating an environment that facilitates the development of others. If you agree that leaders want to help others grow their ability to adapt to the complex challenges they inevitably face, including work in teams, it becomes paramount that they are able to identify varying levels of cognitive development. It's also important for them to consider what teams can do to help the individual grow. For example, a leader might work with an employee who appears to be in over their head, where the complexity of the job exceeds their ability to adapt and flourish. Because this is a theory about growth, the leader needs to gauge how far to extend their hand to lift their employee to a more developed understanding of the world. Of course, the other possibility is that a leader has the humility to recognize that their employee may be further along than they are in maturity. In this way, as long as they're familiar with what it takes, they can still lend support to help launch their employee to new heights. But what does it take for a leader to help people at different levels grow? Let's consider how supporting and inspiring development requires impeccable timing, acute observation, and critical dialogue. Timing is crucial. Personal transformation is a very difficult thing to expect if there's no sense of urgency, pain, or confusion that's great enough for us to take a deep, reflective look at ourselves. How you lead the development of others and yourself will depend greatly upon the degree of disorientation the person is facing. Consider the following situations where timing might be right for facilitating development. Employee 1 is bored, sailing along and experiencing minimum difficulty at work. Why should they change? They plan the work and work the plan, no big deal. Well, as a leader, if you wait long enough, eventually a disorienting dilemma will arise. But if the employee continues wilting in the tedium of their own cubicle, it may be time to invite them to work on a project outside of their comfort zone, one that's more complex in nature. Employee 2 is frustrated with an individual on their team, and their hostility is beginning to boil over. It keeps them up at night. It affects their performance and the cohesion of the team. They lack clarity around why this is happening and yearn to resolve the underlying conflict. Employee 3 is anxious because she was recently promoted to a position of authority that resides over a team of former peers. She wants to continue to be liked, but has to balance this with expectations associated with her new role. And what about observation? Bored, frustrated, and anxious employees are relatively easy to identify. What takes more skill is observing for and tailoring dialogue around their level of cognitive development. A leader can begin by observing the language an employee uses, behaviors that demonstrate their emotional readiness to grow, and the degree to which they're attached to their own worldview. A leader can observe for all of these in the way 2 or more employees process conflict. A leader can also observe by inviting discussions around what an employee values most. Is it their accomplishments, their relationships, or their ability to self-direct? Depending on the observation a leader makes, they can match the level of developmental opportunities with the level of maturity demonstrated by an employee. These opportunities might include coaching, more advanced levels of professional development, leadership opportunities, job rotation, and even peer-to-peer mentoring. And what about dialogue? Leadership conversations can take an entirely different direction given an employee's level of development. Yet the goal in dialogue is always the same: to validate the level of the employee is at without judging, to help them consider the motivations they attribute to themselves and others, and to challenge them to reflect on their assumptions and test new worldviews. I've developed a system called the 3 ifs to help guide the conversation. When working with individuals, I ask myself, what are the person's if-onlys? What are the person's it's-as-ifs? And what are the person's what-ifs? And here's how it works. If only. When speaking about if only, we're encouraging the employee to verbalize and clarify their attachments, given the type of disorientation they're facing. An example would be, if only we could fix the conflict that takes place in my department. Now what about it's as if? This means challenging them to explain their attributions, or what they believe is the underlying cause behind what they are observing. An example would be, it's as if nobody cares that conflict is hurting others. And lastly, what if? Here you explore together their assumptions by considering different possibilities for what is occurring, how it can be understood, and what they might try differently. An example is, what if conflict is just a natural function of group life, and rather than taking a fix-it point of view, I try out a harness-it point of view? So consider timing, observation, and dialogue. What would leading development look like with the 3 most predominant orders of consciousness present in adulthood? And what would it take to cultivate a team that supports growth in its members? A leader will know their employee is in the Imperial order of development if they're consumed with not going outside of protocol, breaking rules, or deviating from instructions. They'll often burden leaders and coworkers with the uncomfortable responsibility of telling them exactly how things should be done, down to the very last detail. The goal for leaders is to help these individuals recognize that their rule-bound, status quo-seeking habit of mind does not always serve them or others in the team well. In fact, it can stifle innovation and subvert team cohesion. Leaders can begin by helping these individuals consider solving problems on their own, rather than referring back to the leader for exactly what they should do, as in, tell me what to say. So let's consider some dialogue prompts appropriate for this level of development. Here the goal is to inspire the individual to try things on their own and take low-consequence risks to build their creative confidence. It's good to begin by validating what the employee has done directly, correctly, and incorrectly, and acknowledge their concern. So we might say, if only people would tell us exactly what they expect of us, life would be much easier. Then you might encourage them to take on the point of view of another, even your own. An example would be, it's as if I, the leader, actually knows the best way to do this. Or as if there is a best or right way. It may be good to follow up by creating a safe place for taking risks. You can do this by asking, what if I told you it's okay to make a mistake as long as you give it your best shot? Another example is, what if you had a magic wand and there were no repercussions? What would you do differently when it comes to taking this particular task? The team can support the growth of this individual by being clear about goals and roles, as well as dates by which the work needs to be done. In meetings, the team can work off of a concrete agenda sent in advance and check back on ground rules established by the team. The team can also inspire the individual to brainstorm together about how the rules or policies can be rewritten to account for recent changes experienced by the organization. A leader will know their employee is in the interpersonal order of consciousness when they demonstrate that their well-being hinges on being liked by the leader, accepted by others, and praised. If their teammate is expressing frustration in a meeting, for instance, they often assume responsibility. And what if that individual is the cause of dismay in their teammate? even if their comment was valid and communicated in a courteous way, simply knowing that they caused their colleague temporary heartburn can consume them long after the meeting has ended. It can be exhausting for an individual to be constantly vigilant about whether they are valued, agreeable, and meet the team's expectations. In conversation, a leader might help by saying, "If only we could always be courteous and work to maintain the harmony of the group," or "If only we could concentrate on valuing and appreciating each other." It's also important to validate. You could use sentences such as, "It seems as if your value to this team really depends on whether you are liked," or "as if you can please everyone." A leader can also ask, "What if we want to hear your own divergent point of view and be challenged by you from time to time?" Or, "What if causing some discomfort in others by challenging them is part of what it takes to be a great leader?" The team can support this individual by affirming that they are a valuable member of the team, celebrating their accomplishments, and listening with unconditional positive regard as the individual shares their ideas. The goal is to create a safe environment for taking the risk of raising opposing points of view. At the same time, the team can challenge this individual to see that conflict is a part of group life and a great ingredient for creativity. If the individual is in the self-authoring order of consciousness, they no longer judge their worth by how well they keep up appearances. They'll let you know that they disagree. They'll demonstrate their discomfort in the midst of conflict, and they'll challenge their teammates' assumptions. They won't seem concerned about whether they're liked, and they can discuss relationships apart from themselves in order to reflect upon them. They work from an internal sense of authority and check whether in any given conflict whether they're staying true to their convictions. To help develop someone who's self-authoring, we could offer the following. If only my teammates could see things the way I do when it comes to the obvious flaws in our strategic plan. It's important here to give this employee an opportunity to reflect out loud on the way their assumptions of teammates may be incomplete or uninformed. In the spirit of critique, you also want to challenge the employee's own belief system. An example would be, "As if the way you are suggesting we do things is without flaw." Or, "What if there is validity in all of the points of view that have been expressed on the team, as well as alternative interpretations waiting to emerge?" Here you want to create an opening for the self-authoring employee to temporarily set aside their beliefs and practice seeing validity in points of view that are different from or outright challenge their own points of view. The team can support a self-authoring individual by creating a space for them and others to share their unique understanding of the strategic plan and the types of goals they have personally wished to be a part of the discussion. The team can also challenge this individual to transcend their own worldview, to acknowledge those worldviews of others on the team, and even worldviews that do not exist yet, but are waiting to be discovered. Martin Buber, a great philosopher known for his work in dialogue, once said that the help we give each other raises us all to new heights.